culture change that suddenly happened because someone decided that all the men in the military were predators was wrong and hurtful, and I don't know, it's going to take a long time to recover from that.
But this isn't the first time a Liberal government, or even a Trudeau, have attempted to usher in sweeping changes to Canada's military culture. Back in the 1960s, the Liberals, first under Pearson and then Trudeau Sr., introduced what was known as unification, destroying the separate identities of Canada's Army, Navy, and Air Force, stripping them of their separate uniforms, changing their insignia, and leading to a mass exodus of senior personnel, including the unprecedented dismissal of the Navy's most senior operational commander. All this in the context of large budget cuts that would reverberate for decades to come. Although in fairness, they didn't actually attempt to put a senior military commander in jail.
Vice Admiral Mark Norman was suspended as the military's second-in-command 2 years ago. He's accused of leaking government secrets.
Ottawa, notoriously a leaky place, and yet this is believed to be the first time ever somebody has been criminally charged.
In 2018, Vice Admiral Mark Norman was charged with breach of trust and relieved of his command as head of the Canadian Navy, a prosecution that many now view as politically motivated by certain members of Trudeau's cabinet, or quite possibly the Prime Minister himself. 1 year later, the charges were stayed due to, quote, no reasonable prospect of conviction, and shortly thereafter Norman received an all-party apology from the House of Commons. His legal fees were reimbursed, and an undisclosed settlement was reached.
I'm obviously pleased with the Crown's decision to stay the charges against me. While I'm relieved to be exonerated of any wrongdoing, I am disappointed it has taken this long.
Mark Norman's treatment by the Liberal Trudeau government was appalling.
First thing I would tell you about Mark Norman is I know him well, and I think he's one of the men with a great amount of integrity. And I think we unfortunately lost him because of what happened.
And he was railroaded. He was absolutely railroaded. To drag him through the mud, to reputationally, the harm that it did to him and his family.
Someone who signed up to serve their country.
Absolutely. It was a dark chapter in Canadian military history, and it was people who were responsible for that have never been held to account.
Whether it's the Mark Norman affair, budget cuts, or attempts to wokeify military culture, one thing has always stood out. Justin Trudeau doesn't seem to take national defense seriously. He doesn't seem to care if the military is properly trained or equipped, or if morale is high. Everything is politicized, and many serving in uniform have begun taking note.
While I had been offered a 4th year in command of the Air Force, I chose to retire because I didn't feel that I could, faithfully serve the government. I was in disagreement with their policies. They had politicized the procurement for political means that I thought were irresponsible for the protection of our country.
I've got friends that work at the Puzzle Palace, in the National Defense Headquarters and in Ottawa, and they'll tell you privately that the Prime Minister couldn't give a rat's ass about the opinion of his generals, his intelligence officers. There's no care one way or the other.
No respect.
None.
I think the vast majority of people currently in the Liberal governing team take their cues from a very small group of loyalists which surround the current Prime Minister. And after 9 years in power, they're almost programmed out of independent thinking, and they just follow essentially the party line that comes down from the Prime Minister's office.
And if you notice when the Prime Minister unveiled the defense policy update, he never once mentioned service. He never once talked about the honor of serving your country.
What are you attracting people to? You're attracting, is it a job? Well, there's much better job, notwithstanding the fact 39 years, it was an awesome career I had. But if all you're looking for is a job, there's lots of other opportunities. So what is it about a service in the armed forces that is appealing? Well, is it a sense of purpose? A sense of identity? These are almost intangible and extremely subjective characteristics that we're not really talking about.
But to be fair to Justin Trudeau, perhaps he doesn't think of our military as a fighting force. Instead, perhaps he views them, as Liberal governments have for decades, as simply peacekeepers.
It's a much more liberal, small and large L liberal construct to downgrade and in some ways sort of diminish the actual combat component of military service.
And so that of course is demoralizing, because you don't join to spend time on
Government PowerPoints.
Yeah, those social engineering programs. You join to blow shit up. Right?
What's the purpose of the armed forces? The purpose of the armed forces is to fight.
And as we've seen throughout history, so-called peacekeeping isn't always so peaceful.
Medak, a village in the former Yugoslavia, the scene in late 1993 of a death struggle involving Croats and Serbs in a gruesome civil war.
The smell is something that it took me years to move away from.
I saw things that no Canadian was ever trained to see. Yes, we'd seen the war movies and everything else, but it's a lot different than a video game when you're seeing it in real life.
Peacekeepers are a significant part of Canada's military history, but this sort of romantic notion of blue-helmeted Pearsonian peacekeeping, frankly, it's peacemaking, not peacekeeping.
And that was never a thing anyway, right? That's a fictional idea that people like Justin Trudeau grew up thinking was real, because they would see a photograph in a magazine of some Canadian peacekeeper with a flag and kissing a baby. No one in Bosnia stopped shooting because Canadians went over and waved a little blue UN flag and kissed somebody. That's not what happened.
My job wasn't to go build the relationships. My job was to drop bombs. There was no peacekeeping. We were kicking your door in the middle of the night.
Close with and destroy the enemy through the aggressive use of firepower and battlefield mobility. That's what the role is.
Many of them experienced full-on combat missions. You know, it's an attempt, I think, to make it more somehow palatable to people. But it's not real, and it's certainly not reflective of the world that we live in today. These are missions that are going to be extremely challenging.
And when Canada sends its forces overseas, whether for so-called peacekeeping, peacemaking, or a full-blown conventional conflict, the state of readiness of our armed forces can determine whether some who deploy will live or die.
Canadian forces were minutes away from running out of ammunition during a key battle in the Afghanistan war.
We were expecting fighting. We were expecting to be shot at. Just not with the type of intensity it has been.
And every day is a challenge like that. You don't know what's going to happen next.
I joined when I was 17 years old, just out of high school. Went to Rota Zero, Op Athena, which was in Kabul. So a lot of violence has happened, yet we were going as peacemakers, which was confusing to a lot of us.
I think initially we thought this was going to be a peacekeeping, peacemaking operation. It rapidly ramped up into a counterinsurgency.
We were ill-equipped in a lot of ways, and we were trained inaccurately in a lot of ways because we never really had exposure to a desert-like environment, right? And we were operating in green camouflage that was designed for a Canadian environment. So we were standing out with green camouflage in a desert setting.
I showed up in green CADPAT into a desert, as with the rest of our contingent, and we were living in tents for months on end, while our allies had just better planning and better equipment and better preparedness all around.
We were probably in the fiercest, we were in the most challenging part of the country in Kandahar province. And we were suffering significant casualties at one period, the highest in NATO. And Afghanistan, for our generation, was a real wake-up call for the country. We had over 40,000 Canadians, some of them who went on multiple missions, and who came back, changed by the mission, physically or psychologically.
Over the 10 years Canada was in Afghanistan, 158 Canadian Armed Forces members lost their lives, and over 1,800 were wounded during the conflict. A sacrifice that those who join the Canadian military quite literally sign up for through what is known as unlimited liability, a concept explained to me by Afghan war veteran Brock Blazchuk.
The Canadian Armed